All right, today we're going to talk about a religious order that you have probably never heard of. But their story, it's a wild ride. From radical humility to the king's court, and then, well, almost total extinction. It's absolutely fascinating. I want to start with just one number, 174. That's it. That's the total number of members in the Order of Minims in the entire world today. So that brings us to the big question, right? How does that even happen? How does a movement that's spread all across Europe with thousands of followers shrink so much that it's on the verge of disappearing? Well, the answer is a crazy story of extreme faith, political power, and violent revolution. To really get a grip on this order, we have to go all the way back to its founder. Because this story, it doesn't start with some grand plan or institution. Nope, it starts with one young man's incredibly radical idea about what it means to be humble. So picture this. It's the 1400s in southern Italy. A teenager, his name is Francis of Paola, decides, you know what? I'm done with society. At just 15 years old, he goes off, finds a cave, and starts living as a hermit, completely dedicating himself to prayer and a life of serious austerity.
So how did this guy, Francis, see himself? He used this Italian phrase to define his entire goal in life, il minimo dei minimos. And that translates to the least of the least. This wasn't just some catchy motto, this was the very foundation of his entire movement.
And that's exactly where the name for his order comes from, the minimums, from that Italian word minimo. Now get this. He wanted his followers to be seen as even smaller, even less important than the famous Friars Minor, the lesser brothers of Saint Francis of Assisi. He was essentially trying to out-humiliate one of the most famous saints of humility in all of history. So, his followers took the three vows you often see in religious orders: poverty, chastity, and obedience. Pretty standard stuff. But Francis added a fourth one, and believe me, this last one is what really set them apart. It was a real game changer. This fourth vow was for a perpetual Lenten life. So what does that mean? Well, it means for your entire life, year-round, you couldn't eat meat, eggs, or any dairy products. They were essentially vegan. And think about that, in the 15th century, this was an act of incredible penance and, for them, a powerful statement about nonviolence towards all living creatures. Okay, but here's the great paradox of the whole story. An order founded on being the least and staying hidden from the world, well, it didn't stay hidden for very long at all. In fact, their founder was about to get launched from his remote cave right into the middle of European royalty and power.
And this is where things just get wild. The guy who wanted nothing more than to be left alone and unknown gets personally summoned by one of the most powerful men in Europe, King Louis XI of France. The king was on his deathbed and begged Francis to come. And Francis became such a trusted figure that he actually stayed on to advise the king's son, too. From a cave in Italy to the French royal court, you just can't make this stuff up.
And part of what made him so famous were these just unbelievable stories of miracles that started popping up around him. The most famous one says that when a boatman wouldn't take him across the Strait of Messina because he had no money, Francis just laid his cloak on the water, tied it to his staff, and sailed across. Can you imagine seeing that? It's a powerful image that really sealed his reputation as a saint.
And his compassion, it wasn't just for people. He was famous for his love of animals. There's this one story about his pet lamb, Martinello, who was killed and eaten by some workmen. Francis supposedly found the lamb's fleece and bones, called its name, and it jumped right out, totally fine. These are the kinds of stories that really show you what the order's core belief in nonviolence was all about.
So, things are going great, right? The minimums are growing, spreading from Italy to France, Spain, Germany. But what goes up must come down. And this incredible rise, which started with humility, was about to run headfirst into a catastrophic fall, born from pure political violence. This is where we get to the real heart of the order's ruin. So how did it all just fall apart? Well, this timeline shows a political perfect storm that was brewing for decades. First, you have the French Revolution in 1790, putting the church under state control. Then, a few years later, the Reign of Terror unleashes this wave of violent persecution. Then, Napoleon's armies march across Europe, shutting down convents and monasteries left and right. It was just this relentless century-long assault that the Minims just could not recover from.
And we're not talking about gentle changes here. No, this was brutal. Government seized all their property. They forcibly shut down their homes. Members were hunted down. Many were thrown in prison. Some were even executed. Entire communities that had been around for centuries were just gone, disbanded overnight.
And that right there, that's the answer to the question we started with. The Order's main centers in France, Spain, Germany, and Italy were completely wiped out. The political chaos of that era is the direct reason why this once thriving movement is now on the very edge of disappearing.
So, after all that destruction, what's even left? Are we just looking at the last few embers of a legacy that's almost completely faded away?
I mean, just look at the numbers. The sheer scale of this collapse it's just hard to wrap your head around. At its peak, the Order of Minims had something like 9,000 members. Today, like we said at the beginning, that number is 174. This chart really puts it into perspective. A fall of over 98%. Just wow. But you know, their legacy hasn't totally vanished. And it pops up in the most random places. Have you ever heard of Paulaner beer? Well, turns out it was first brewed by German Minim friars back in Munich. The beer is literally named for their founder, Francis of Paola. So yeah, next time you see that brand, you'll know there's a wild story of a nearly vanished order behind it. And all of this leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The Minimists were founded on this radical idea of being the least. In our world today, which is constantly shouting at us to get more influence, more followers, more everything, what, if anything, can we learn from the story of the least?